Hi guys, this is Max here, back again with hopefully another great political video. But today we're gonna cover a topic that I find very interesting, but that very little people actually care about. Today we're gonna analyze which region, rural, urban, suburban, has the most electoral impact in each and every single state. So, we're going to have to determine what is the largest voting base in the state. Now, a state like Illinois has one major urban area, Chicago, that basically outvotes the entire rest of the state, and therefore the urban areas are the most determinative vote basket in the state. A state like Wyoming only has rural areas, and therefore rural areas are the ones that decide the way how that state goes. You understand me? So, we're not determining what is the largest amount of areas within a state. We're determining which of these three areas makes the biggest electoral impact. And since Republicans have been steadily increasing in rural support while having some setbacks in suburban support, it'll be very easy to draw a clear line here. Now, in New York City outvotes the entire rest of the state. Vermont, where I live, has absolutely no urban areas. Maine's first district is in many ways rural. No, Maine's second. Maine is the suburban category along with New Hampshire. Now, Massachusetts is an urban state. Suburban because it has not one huge town that controls the entire state. It's like many mid-sized towns that have the most electoral impact. New Jersey itself is also just a big suburb, which is why I'd also classify this as a suburban state. And Maryland is basically controlled by the urban areas, and Delaware is actually kind of split, but the urban areas do outvote the rest of the state. Now, Pennsylvania is a swing state. And in that state, the suburbs hold the most control over who wins an election. They only make up about 20% of the total population. However, since the rural areas in Pennsylvania are ruby red, and the Democrat areas and the urban areas are deep blue Democrat, it is the suburbs of Philadelphia that determine the way how an election goes. Now, West Virginia is rural. Virginia is a very suburban state. So is North Carolina, actually also South Carolina. Just the suburbs there are a bit more Republican, and Georgia. Now, Florida, and this will probably be a more controversial choice because it is a pretty Republican state, but it's actually, if we look at Miami, Jacksonville, and Orlando, a very urban state. And therefore, it should be a Democrat state. However, despite that fact, Republicans are doing extremely well there, and especially the cities in Florida are much less Democratic, Miami in particular, so that they're not capable of just outvoting the rest of the state. Now, D.C. is very much just a city. Indiana, the suburbs there used to have more voting power, but the state is not really competitive anymore. Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Kansas. Those are all states where rural areas have the biggest determining factor in who wins an election. Now, Ohio is an interesting case because the suburbs of Ohio are actually trending more Republican than suburbs throughout the rest of the country. Like the Cleveland suburbs trended to the right, only Dayton and Cincinnati trended to the left. In Ohio, an area known as the exurban areas, what is right outside a city and outside the suburbs, where most of the working class lives, that's where the Republicans draw their new support from. However, I would still classify exurban as more closely aligned with rural, and therefore the rural vote determines who wins in Ohio. Now, Iowa has always been a state where the rural vote determines the winner. It's just been that in more recent years, it used to be a larger Democrat support base in rural Iowa that has now faded. All of Nebraska, except for the 2nd district, which is suburban, not really urban, I should say, is actually Democrat. The Plain States are not even up for debate. Minnesota is, Minneapolis and, what was the other city again? St. Paul. Yeah, they're like the rural areas, the cities are pretty determinative. In Wisconsin, it is kind of the suburbs in the Waukesha area, but for Republicans, high turnout in the rural areas is also very important. Now, Michigan is an interesting state because the rural areas there are not as red as in the rest of the country, and the city is already pretty Democrat. So the area of Michigan where a candidate needs to do well is basically the suburban areas, but also, actually, the rural areas are the most important ones. Also, if you look at Gretchen Whitmer's victory in 2018, she had lots of support from the rural areas of the state. So Michigan is really a state where the rural areas matter for the winner. God, I say rural so many times in this video. Anyway, now Texas has many big cities, it has many big suburbs. However, I still think that the countryside has the biggest impact electorally on Texas. You could make the case that it is a suburban state because suburbs there are extremely powerful, but no Democrat has ever been able to win Texas without sizable rural support, and until I don't see a Democrat winning without that support, I can't classify suburban areas as being the primary vote basket in the state of Texas. Now, Colorado used to be suburban. Now, Denver and Fort Collins are just so Democrat that it's essentially a state where urban areas determine where the vote goes. For New Mexico, it's still kind of suburbs, so they're pretty Democrat. In Arizona, Utah, and Nevada, suburbs are everything in terms of winning an election. These southwestern states used to be extremely rural. However, due to migration in more recent years, they have become more urban and suburban, which is why you need to win in the suburbs in order to do well in those states. Now, California doesn't even matter urban. Oregon, Washington, there are these big cities, Portland and Washington, just determine everything. And for Hawaii, it's Honolulu, and Alaska has no huge... Actually, in Alaska, the rural areas are mostly inhabited by Native Americans. And the bigger population hubs, Anchorage and Fairbanks, are Republican strongholds. More significantly, the suburban areas of those states. So I'd actually determine Alaska as a state where suburbs hold the most power. So now there you have it, folks. That's a map of the states and which population hub a candidate needs to do best in order to win those states. For states like Illinois, New York, California, and even Florida, surprisingly, it is the urban areas where you need to do well if you want to control the entire state. For many swing states, but also for some reliably red or blue states like New Mexico and South Carolina, suburban areas are the most determinative factor. It is just that in both of these cases, they tend to swing heavily one way or the other. And in almost every single state that voted for Donald Trump, including and in addition to that, Vermont, Michigan, and Wisconsin, rural votes are what you need to win if you want to win in the entire state. And if we look at this map, even though there are some irregularities in there, it is almost entirely a reflection of Republican and Dem-leaning states. And that's what we need to look at in future elections and how this map changes in order to determine who will probably be the winner. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please likes, comments, subscriptions, always greatly appreciated. I hope you'll come visit my channel again. Have a good day, and Max out. See you tomorrow.